I love an old-fashioned Halloween party, apple bobbing, children in impossibly creepy costumes, and candy that would be completely unacceptable to hand out to trick-or-treaters today. Like this rather delightful vinegar candy from 1896. So thank you to Vite Ramen for sponsoring this video as I make some old-fashioned vinegar candy. This time on Tasting History. So whenever I think of an old-fashioned Halloween, I can't help but think of those scenes from Meet Me in St. Louis, which took place in 1903. It was the height of Halloween's mischievous days, with truly macabre masks and children running amok. And while children did go knocking on neighbors' doors, it wasn't trick-or-treating, it was more just tricking, like throwing flour in their face when they opened the door. But that doesn't mean that there weren't sweets involved in the holiday. It's just that instead of getting them from neighbors, they were usually waiting for the children at home. Everything from cake to vinegar candy, like this recipe from 1896, which I included in the Tasting History cookbook. And just a reminder, this month, October, I will be on book tour in several cities, so I'll make sure to put all of the information for that in the description of this video. Now, long before I included it in the Tasting History cookbook, this recipe was in the Fannie Farmer Boston Cooking School cookbook. And it says, put butter into kettle. When melted, add sugar and vinegar. Stir until sugar is dissolved, afterwards occasionally. Boil until, when tried in cold water, mixture will become brittle. Turn on a buttered platter to cool, pull and cut the same as molasses candy. Elsewhere, she gives options on how to make this into a variety of candy types, just changing up the temperature of the sugar. But regardless of the texture of the candy, the flavor is going to be that sugar. Not the vinegar, not the butter, sugar, because there is a lot of it in this recipe. So maybe it's best to balance it out with something a little more healthy, like a bowl of ramen noodles from today's sponsor, Vite. Vite is a small business of passionate people who make everything themselves here in the US, and they believe that ramen noodles can be elevated to a premium style meal that is not only delicious, but also healthy. Vite's nutritious and versatile noodles are made with a blend of flours, including quinoa, and they pack in up to 31 grams of protein, and they're high in fiber, iron, and B vitamins. They take about 5 minutes to make, are wonderfully filling, and have lots of great flavors like masaman curry and pork tonkotsu. You can also use their plain noodles, Naked Nudes, to build more complex ramen bowls using recipes from their website. So to give Vite Ramen a try, go to viteramen.com/tastinghistory and use my code TASTINGHISTORY10 to get 10% off at checkout. And right now they have a limited time offer for $25 worth of free gifts, including chopsticks, a hooked soup spoon, and stickers. That's viteramen.com/tastinghistory using my code TASTINGHISTORY10, or just click the link in the description. And once you've had a nice, healthy bowl of ramen, you won't feel so bad about eating this candy, which requires 2 cups or 400 grams of sugar, a half cup or 120 milliliters of apple cider vinegar or other mild vinegar, 2 tablespoons or 30 grams of melted butter, and an optional pinch of salt. So first, butter a baking dish and then set it aside, and then mix all of the ingredients together in a saucepan and set it over medium heat, stirring everything while it heats. But as soon as it begins to simmer around the edges, you gotta leave it be. Don't stir it because you might create crystals and you'll have to start all over again. Also, it really helps to have a candy thermometer or an instant read thermometer for this. You can do it without a thermometer, but it's very, very tricky, especially if you haven't done it a lot and you don't really know what you're looking for. And what you're looking for is for the sugar to reach a specific temperature. The temperature is going to determine the texture of the candy. Now, her description talks about it getting brittle, which is known as the hard crack stage. And this is when the sugar hits 300 to 310 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the stage right before caramelization, and it's going to make for a pretty hard candy. But if you bring it down to what is known as the soft crack stage, 270 to 290 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to be more like a very firm taffy. Then there's one level below that you could do. That's the softball stage, or 250 degrees to 265, and that's going to give you a much softer taffy texture. It's a lot harder to work with, but it's a lot easier on your teeth. I'm actually going to make both the softer taffy and the hard crack version just to see the difference. Whatever you choose though, keep a close eye on the thermometer because the temperature can go up very, very quickly. Now you'll know when it reaches the hard crack stage when you take a little drop of sugar and put it into very cold water. And if it, as she says, becomes brittle, it's ready. I promise you though, using a thermometer is definitely the way to go. As soon as it reaches whatever temperature you're aiming for, pour it into that buttered pan and let it cool just for a few minutes. Now this next part is done usually, traditionally, with buttered hands, and I tried that and it can be done, it's just very, very messy. It is much easier to do it wearing latex gloves, but either way works. So as soon as it's cool enough to handle but still quite warm, pull the sugar up from the bottom of the pan and start to fold it over on itself. Now if you go for the softer texture, it is going to work, but it's going to be much, much stickier, much harder to work with, and it's going to take a lot longer to get it to a usable consistency. But either way, keep folding the candy over and then gently begin to pull it apart. Then twist, fold again, pull, twist, and fold again. Do this in the pan for the first few minutes until you feel it's become firm enough to take out of the pan and continue folding, pulling, twisting, and folding again. Now this can take quite a while, anywhere from 20 minutes up to an hour or so before it's ready. And they used to actually have kids doing this mainly as a way to just keep them out of trouble. Anything to keep the kids out of trouble. In fact, that's also why we have Halloween parties today. Halloween in its current form is pretty tame. At worst, you might get your house teepeed or eggs thrown at it, and frankly, I don't really think that happens all that much anymore. But it wasn't always that way. Here in the United States, it used to be a much wilder holiday with Scottish origins in the form of couples picking cabbages to tell their future. The first ceremony of Halloween is pulling each a stalk or plant of kale, colewort. They must go out hand in hand with eyes shut and pull the first they meet with. Its being big or little, straight or crooked, is prophetic of the size and shape of the grand object of all their spells. Seems innocent enough, except that it became common to pick not your own greens, but those of your neighbor. And if we learned nothing else from Into the Woods, it is not to steal greens from your neighbor, especially if she's a witch. And while in Scotland, everyone kind of saw it as something to do all in good fun, when Scottish immigrants brought the practice over to the United States in the 19th century, not everyone was so on board with this, especially because it turned into not only stealing cabbages from your neighbor, but then pelting their house with the cabbages afterward. The evening of the 31st of October in each year is called Hallow Eve, or in Scotland, where we believe the tradition originated, Halloween, when the absurd practice of stealing cabbage and batting it against the doors of dwellings is practiced by the silly and mischievous of most parts of the county. The practices were all innocent amusements for the lads and lasses of that country in old time, but it is preposterous to say nothing of its criminality, that at this bright day the mischievous persons of these parts, many of whom probably do not know from whence the tradition arose, should annually revive the practices at all, much less go so far beyond the custom of simply pulling the cabbage in their own gardens as to steal it from those of their neighbors and destroy it. The practice continued throughout the 19th century, but while it had originally been young adults doing it, it had transferred hands to the more devious youths of the country. In Bangor, Maine, in 1872, there was a complaint that on Halloween, as usual, the boys had rare sport in clearing gardens of such cabbages, turnips, and other vegetables as the unwary owners had not removed, though their fun was somewhat dampened by the rain. Well, heavens to Betsy. But the older kids, the teens, they had really outgrown this tradition of trampling people's gardens in favor of attending house parties. It's the 1860s and 70s when we begin to see the first mentions of Halloween parties, but always just for the older kids. And this left the younger kids, the hooligans, to destroy the town. And it really got bad when this Scottish tradition of stealing cabbages merged with the English tradition of Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night, and those all merged with the tradition of Mischief Night. In Meet Me in St. Louis, you can see the ruffians building a bonfire in the street, and in many towns across the US, this was the norm. And in some towns, it was customary to go to every single home in the town, steal wood of some sort, and drag it into the center of town and build a massive towering inferno. It was absolutely pandemonium. So much worse than just teepeeing, especially because to add to the fear of the citizens, it was common to take other pieces of wood and furniture and barricade adults inside their houses so they couldn't come out to break it up. But there were ways to curtail this outlawry, and that was to keep the kids busy. In 1903, a cookbook suggested one way was to throw a Halloween party. While the dictionary definition of Halloween is rather different than the modern small boys' interpretation of it would indicate, yet we say with all earnestness, give the boys a good time occasionally, and why not on Halloween? Boys will be far less apt to carry off the clothes posts, unhinge the gates, and make night hideous if you give them a part in keeping with the occasion. A party where paper caps adorn the head and where jack-lanterns adorn the room. Though the refreshments that she suggests you have at this Halloween party are rather different from what we would have today, especially considering that the guests are a bunch of rowdy little boys. Things like bouillon de jolly boys, celery, kindergarten crackers, turtle sandwiches, little pigs in blankets, orange jelly, olives on natural history, sugar off with maple syrup, nut cartoons, lemonade. Some of them make sense, like lemonade and pigs in a blanket, though in 1903, pigs in a blanket were not made with hot dogs, but with oysters, so different. A suggestion for a Halloween spread from 1905 much more closely resembles something that we would imagine today. It advised that browning nuts, popping corn, roasting apples, and toasting marshmallows will add a great deal to the pleasure of the evening. Pumpkins of various sizes should be scooped and scraped to a hollow shell, and lined with wax paper and filled with good things to eat, should be placed in the center of the table. But that Halloween party was not meant for children. It was meant for adults, which would leave the children out destroying the town. But in 1912, the little town of Hiawatha, Kansas had an idea. Perhaps someone there had read the 1903 suggestion on how to keep kids busy, but this time they would mandate it for the entire town. Resolved that it is the sense of this council that we endorse the efforts of the members of the Civic Improvement Club in their earnest endeavor to arrange for special entertainment for the young people of our city on Halloween, hoping thereby to check the playful yet unlawful pranks that usually result in much damage to the property of citizens of our city. Now, this idea was spearheaded by flower enthusiast and head of the Civic Improvement Club, Elizabeth Krebs, who, to be honest, looks like the kind of person who would shout at kids for trampling her garden. Her plan was to have an entire evening filled with events that would go so late that hopefully all the little hellions would be tuckered out by the time it came for them to tear up the city. The evening would start with a play put on by the children, and this would be followed by a parade and carnival, which didn't even start until 9:30 p.m. When I was a kid, even on Halloween, I think I was asleep by 9:30 p.m. Even now, I can only make it to like 10. Now, for us today, this kind of event doesn't really seem newsworthy. But in 1912, in a country that for decades had been terrorized by little children on Halloween, it was a big deal, and mentions of it were in all of the major newspapers of the Midwest. Big time planned for Halloween at Hiawatha Thursday night. Hiawatha, the first town to plan sane Halloween celebration. Play at Armory by children. A carnival. It remains for Hiawatha to invent a sane Halloween. Other towns have managed a sane 4th, but Hiawatha will be the first country town to adopt the sane Halloween. And to make sure it is indeed sane, there will be extra police this Halloween to prevent destruction of property, so all should refrain from wrongdoing. The children will join the parade from the Armory after the play. Let's have a fun, lawful time. And by extra police, they didn't mean the town's Barney Fife, because not overlooking a bet in the fact that an insurgent might spoil all the fun, an extra squad of police and mounted officers were employed by the city. Any citizen, big or little, who attempts any funny business not on the program will be ostracized. Sounds like a blast. But with the added security, the event went off without a hitch. Except one political effigy hanging to a telephone pole, but this is not to be charged to the carnival. And so in the following years, more and more towns around the entire country began instituting events like this. And it took quite a while, a few decades, but eventually Halloween was tamed into something resembling more of what it has become today. So there's one part of this first Halloween carnival that I thought was really interesting, and that is the costume contest, or rather, the prizes awarded to the winners of the costume contest. Things like pocket knives. The kids are running amok, so what do? we give them pocket knives. But at least kids probably like pocket knives. I know I did when I was a kid. Some of the other prizes, I think, are a little off. A sweater for the nicest costume, a raincoat for the best tramp costume, perfume for the best extravagant ladies costume, and for the prettiest costume, a set of hand-painted salt cellars. I think I would have been the only child to actually have wanted to get those hand-painted salt cellars. Now, I'd venture to say that none of these prizes, including the pocket knives, would appear on an awards list for a costume contest today, but there were some prizes that absolutely would. Like the child with the swellest costume would receive 1 pound of candy. But what kind of candy would have been in this 1 pound bag? Well, in 1912, vinegar candy probably would have been in there, as well as a very popular candy produced by the Görlitz Confectionery Company starting in around 1898. Originally, they called it chicken feed, but it quickly became better known as candy corn and was sold with the slogan, "Something worth crowing for." Other popular candies included caramels, gumdrops, black licorice, jelly beans, and candy buttons. Then there were premium candies like Maynard's Wine Gums, Cracker Jacks, Necco wafers, Hershey bars, and the iconic Tootsie Roll. These candies would have been the height of confection perfection of the time. And some of those candies are still with us today, but most of the Halloween candy that we know and love today wouldn't appear for quite some time. And maybe next year, I'll do a whole history on things like Snickers and M&Ms. But for now, it is the old-fashioned candy that interests me. Old-fashioned candy, like this vinegar candy, which other me should be about done pulling by now. Now, after you've been pulling your candy for about 20 minutes, it should have become opaque and have a nice sheen, and it should be quite difficult to pull. When it gets to that stage, give it a few last twists and pull it into a long rope and set it on the counter. Then cut it up into 1-inch pieces. And here we are, 19th century vinegar candy fit for an old-fashioned Halloween. So I made the two different types. There's the harder candy, which really holds its shape and has a really nice sheen to it. And then we have the softer candy, which doesn't hold its shape nearly as well, but I prefer the texture. And so that's what I'm gonna start with. See, nice and soft. Gooey. That texture I really like. It is like a super soft taffy. And if you get it a little bit harder or a little bit hotter, then it will be harder. Hotter equals harder. So if you want a more firm taffy, just up it to like 270 degrees. Either way, the flavor is wonderful. You don't taste any vinegar at all. It's just the sugar, really. It kind of reminds me of cotton candy. And just like cotton candy, you can add different colors to this. You could add even different flavorings if you want. But yeah, it's a lovely flavor. Now here is the harder candy. And as you can see, it's really held its shape very well. But it's also much harder to eat. It's more something that you'd like want to suck on. I'd be here all day if I did that. This has a better flavor. It's a more complex flavor. I think the softer one is probably, let me eat this, 1 second. Okay, so I think that the softer candy would actually do better to take on the flavor of a flavoring if you wanted to put, I don't know, strawberry or cherry or grape or something in there to flavor it. Whereas this has a little bit of a caramelized taste because we did get so close to caramelization. It does better just plain. But they're both really, really good. I think that one's just sweeter. This one has a little bit of that bitterness, meant like mild bitterness because it's still really, really sweet because it's really just sugar. Now with both of these, if you're going to keep them, you need to wrap them up in some parchment or wax paper actually works even better. This is sticky. The soft one, super sticky. So much harder to work with. It's just frankly a more difficult candy to make. The harder one is the one that you want to start off with if you've never made candy especially, or if you're doing this with kids, because this gets absolutely everywhere. My entire kitchen is actually rather sticky right now. So if you do old-fashioned candy, fantastic. If you're gonna stick with your modern candy, that's fantastic too. Either way, have a wonderful Halloween, and I'll see you next time on Tasting History.